Good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank the organizers for organizing a very vibrant and timely space for conversation. Thank you, Samina. It's a pleasure to see you again, not in Afghanistan, but hopefully soon. This topic of women's rights in Afghanistan and human rights in Afghanistan probably is the most political topic. In many occasions, they say human rights is not a political issue. I think nowadays human rights is one of the most political discussion globally, and this is very true in the case of Afghanistan, both in terms of the weaponization of women's rights and human rights, but also in terms of sometimes using it as a bargaining chip when it comes to diplomacy and political trading off. Yes, and also in the case of Afghanistan, when we would like to assess the situation of human rights and women's situation, we always look at it from the time that the Taliban took control of Afghanistan in 1996 and then 2001. While the life and struggle of women in Afghanistan did not start from then. Historically, a woman in Afghanistan has always had a space in our civic and political environment. In fact, if I give you some figures, probably for some of, especially our Western diplomats, this might be, a new thing that women in Afghanistan had the right to vote before women in Switzerland did. Women in Afghanistan started to be medical doctors and nurses at the same time when women in Turkey started. And I think why we came to this point is a different discussion. I don't want to mix it, but just briefly, I think women in our region are the victim of mainly the Cold War. When the Cold War started, millions of dollars were invested in defeating the USSR through the different mujahideen groups without any benchmarks of indicators of situation of women and human rights. As a result, that money was spent and the society became radicalized. And I have seen that at least in my country. Now, speaking on the situation of women in Afghanistan, we all remember when President Bush announced the Operations Enduring Freedom in 2001, October 2001, he said, we are in Afghanistan to free its women and to help the people of Afghanistan fulfill their democratic rights. Of course, we believe that. We thought we are in this path together. Women were back to school. I was part of that campaign to send hundreds of thousands of female students back to school. Women were free to exercise their rights in the parliament. You're right, we had 25% female parliamentarians, 30% women in civil service, including also in the police and army, women in the villages. I think one of the changes that I could see the difference between now and the time when Afghanistan was occupied by USSR was the fact that women in the villages were also engaged. I remember traveling to a village once for my campaign in a mountainous area in my constituents, Badakhshan. A woman told me that, so Ms. Koofi, who is going to be the next president of United States? Is it going to be Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? And I was like, how do you even follow this? So this indicates that the society was a vibrant society engaged from the local communities. Not only changes were imposed in the constitution, which was one of the most democratic constitutions. I think everything started to fall apart when the Iraq war started. When the Iraq war started, the focus went from Afghanistan to Iraq, and this was the time that the Taliban started re-emerging. And of course, then they were given the space, the office in Doha. And we knew from that time that any possible peace process or reconciliation, women's rights will be the first to be traded off. That's why we wanted to be part of the peace process, and we wanted to have a peace with justice, because it's true that silencing the gun is not peace. Peace is beyond that. Unfortunately, we saw with the return of Taliban and the negotiation of Americans with Taliban emboldened them. As a result, today we see that not only democracy, I wouldn't say fail, but we failed democracy in Afghanistan, but also I think the whole global structure is affected by this. The United States global leadership is being questioned in many occasions because, you know, if you go back to what the United States leaders said, we are there to support women's rights and liberate Afghan women, to a point when we actually question one of their special envoy. I would like to name him, Ambassador Khalilzad, and I said, in your Doha negotiation with the Taliban, there is no one word of human rights and women's rights. His response was that we're not going to kill American soldiers to protect Afghan women's rights. It looked very hypocritical for me, because from a time there where they were there to liberate Afghan women to a point where they were not there to protect Afghan women's rights, and it became all of a sudden an internal issue, because they said women's rights in Afghanistan is an internal issue. You need to deal with it yourself. So we feel we have been weaponized. Our rights are weaponized, but I'm coming to that in the second part of your question.
You made some very important points, that when the decision was taken to withdraw from Afghanistan and the negotiations started with the Taliban in Doha, then all the pledges that had been made once the intervention took place, that women's rights and the rights of girls would be protected and advanced, they fell by the wayside. But in your own role as one of the peace negotiators, do you think that the Taliban representatives understood the importance of listening to women's voices? Or did they think they were going to get what they wanted and there was no need to make any compromise?
Yes, I was one of those engaged in negotiation with the Taliban. I think in any peace process, there are parties to peace. And these parties are mainly the ones who are part of the war. Everybody must be included and listened to in a peace process, and especially the ones that are concerned. In the case of Afghanistan, the architecture of peace process was made in a very interesting way. So the parties to the war were Afghan government, the Taliban, and an international community led by ISAF or NATO. However, when the peace started, from the time the peace process or the negotiation with the Taliban started, all the way from 2009, there were off-the-record meetings, but from 2011, when the Office for Taliban in Doha started, you know, Afghan government was not meaningfully included. Well, now I was a political opposition. I had my own points of view about the way the Afghan government was run. I was a strong critic of, you know, the power being centralized by few individuals. I had my points of view about corruption, but these are part of any democracy. I was listening to the speeches yesterday here. Every speaker was very bold and vocal on the way the Pakistan government runs. They had their points of view, but that doesn't mean that we should actually make the government collapse. So the government had its own problems, but they were mainly bypassed by its international allies and ignored. There are no official data of how many Afghan troops were killed, but there are indications that, that between 60 to 70,000 Afghan troops were killed. Now, when some world leaders say that, you know, 3,000 NATO soldiers were killed, our sympathy and, you know, we share the pain of those lost lives in Afghanistan. But Afghans were the main ones who actually lost everything. Not only their lives, but also their rights. So 60 to 70,000 military personnel, hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed in the last 20 years. But the same people were ignored. When the Americans started negotiation, they went directly engaged with the Taliban because they wanted to talk their own issues. And that was a process of weakening the institutions in Afghanistan. So the collapse did not happen on the 15th of August itself. It was a process that led to 15th of August. When we started the negotiation on the 12th of September 2020, it was too late because I was involved with the Taliban in Moscow when we were involved in dialogue with them. And then the Taliban wanted to have the deal signed with Americans. So they were absolutely different group of Taliban. They were more approachable, they were welcoming, they were open. In fact, it's on the record that they said, from their perspective, women can go to school, university, get PhD, get to public. The only position they cannot get is to be a president or head of state, which is something that is, even the Islamic clerks do not have a common position on that. It's something to be debated. But from the Taliban perspective, the only thing that women cannot do is to be the head of state. Everything else women are allowed to do. This is before they signed the agreement. When they signed the agreement on the 29th of February 2020, and we went to talk to them in September, this was the first moment I realized the Taliban are changed. They have signed the deal with Americans. They think they are, they are the winner anyways. So they were not serious in the negotiation, not only on women's rights, but on everything else. But probably you might ask me the question, why did you stay in the negotiation if the Taliban were not serious? Well, we continued to engage because, first of all, we were blamed for playing the spoiler role. If we left the negotiation table, probably we would have been even more blamed for the consequences of that. But I think the process of failing Afghanistan and the government started way beyond 15th of August, when Americans directly started, not only talking with the Taliban, but also bypassing their European allies. We all remember 15th of August when thousands of people went to the airport and only American Marines were allowed to allow people, had the power to allow people enter the airport, no Europeans. And this was when I went to Europe and I said to the Europeans that you need to have your own independent security-focused foreign policy. I'm not here to talk about Europe, but what I'm trying to say is, multilateralism, accountability, mutual accountability, all the claims that we have made the people of our part of the world believe in that. I think it all started to fall apart when the structure in Afghanistan fell.